Okay. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Shivin Yaltekin. I'm the Dean of Simon Business School at the University of Rochester. We really appreciate you being here today, and we're thrilled to engage with you on the use of generative AI throughout the past academic year at Simon Business School. Our swift adoption of this new technology was a deliberate choice, and we recognize its significant potential impact. And it became very evident that quick integration was essential to empower our students, faculty, staff, and alumni networks with meaningful applications of this transformative technology. Of course, there are a lot of questions around, how to exactly integrate such a new technology. How did we at Simon accomplish this feat? What specific measures did we undertake? So we're going to delve into the intricacies of crafting a vision around this new technology and how we executed the tactical steps to bring it to fruition. We, of course, learned a lot along the way, what was proving to be successful endeavors and how we gauge their effectiveness, and also share with you the valuable lessons learned from some of the challenges that we did encounter along the way. So we're here to talk about all of this today with you. There will be time for Q&A at the end of the session. Please use the Q&A tool in your Zoom if you have a question, and we'll do our best to answer it online today. First, I'd like to introduce my three co-panelists. Mitch Lovett is the Senior Associate of Dean of Education and Innovation and the Benjamin Forman Professor of Marketing. He teaches several marketing and analytics courses. Mitch has led the execution of the vision for implementing generative AI at Simon. Ravi Mantana is the faculty director for our MBA programs and is a clinical professor. He teaches several analytics courses and is our top award-winning instructor. Dan Keating is a clinical assistant professor and the faculty director of academic support. He teaches analytics, marketing, and AI courses and leads the instructional technology and innovation team at Simon, which we call the ITI, which you will hear about throughout the discussion today. They are three of our best, and I am delighted to be working with them every day, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. So let's begin. In the late stages of 2022, when we observed a surge in the adoption of ChatGPT, really signaling a transformative shift, not only on a global scale, but also within our institution in higher education and in business education in particular. We understood the aspects of this technology for the impact it might have in shaping the future of business leadership. And we were so focused on how to think about this technology and what to do with it and how to integrate it into our institution. I know, Mitch, you came over one Sunday because our usual business hours of discussion had run out, and we sat on my porch and talked about our vision for the AI initiative. And we fleshed out a broad strategy and what Simon can do in this space and how Simon can lead and how it can be incorporated into our curriculum. Given our history of innovation of STEM, DEI, and analytics, this seemed like a particularly good fit for us. So can you talk about that vision, Mitch, and some of the early steps we took?
Absolutely. This was an exciting time. I mean, it was a lot of fun talking about all this and figuring out where we're going. And the core of that was how do we prepare our students for this new world, to be better managers with AI, and how do we leverage the capabilities and competencies that Simon has had for some time into this new space. What I think is really important is it wasn't reactionary, kind of the academic integrity concerns. I mean, of course, that's part of the conversation we're going to have today, but that wasn't really the focus. It wasn't about catching the cheaters, so to speak. It was forward-looking, and ChatGPT really worked well enough in many cases that we need to think about, how it was going to change things. And how to make our students more effective. And so at the same time, it was working well enough. It was still unproven, and how we could incorporate it and, what level of expertise we needed to have. All that was unclear, the security, ethics questions, lots of things that were still quite unclear about it. And so, we set this out, and as we talked, recognizing kind of core part of this was making sure students had AI literacy. What what the uses are, what the potential impact could be, the challenges, and then, from a faculty point of view and even a staff point of view, really understanding, a little more deeply how to think about using these tools, and what reskilling needs to happen to support integration in the curriculum. And that, of course, includes lots of change management kind of things, training, promoting, sharing, collaborating, and being able to keep pace with the rapid pace of changes that were happening in this field and still are. So what are the big pieces that we kind of were focused on? I mean, of course, in our conversation, senior leadership and the vision from the top to make it as clear as possible so people could understand how they could engage, how they could be a part of this initiative and part of transforming what we're doing. So we framed this as an educational framework with three core pieces to it. There was the core AI. That's kind of the workshops at the kind of the top of the pyramid, if you will, the core course pieces. We started with prompt engineering workshops that Dan and I were involved in, and I think Dan will talk a little more about later. Really thinking about, okay, well, what do our graduates need to be able to do, and to be responsible users, the ethics, the understanding, bias, but what are those skills that we can deliver to them. And we did not only these workshops, but in every program had a core course. And so think about the technical courses that go beyond extending that core piece. But then we wanted to think beyond just kind of this is a technical component to cross the curriculum. Part of the goal and vision of the AI initiative was to think about this as being a very broad implications for the curriculum. And we developed a grant system for faculty to be able to engage in this, be incentivized to, on an accelerated basis, bring those AI tools into the classroom from across the curriculum, from communication courses to statistics courses, all of the pieces in between as possibilities. So that cross curriculum was really important. But then the third part of this was recognizing that AI can lead to personalization and individualized instruction. And that includes that assessment component. How do we address what's happening in the assessment with AI and students being able to leverage that, and how do we adapt to that? We already had lots of resources invested, actually, and we just put together this ITI team that you mentioned earlier that Dan is the director of, and that was a really important piece, and that team helped shape the policy and other pieces, and so I want to give Dan the chance to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's a really important part of the puzzle.
Very good. Thank you, Shabin. Thank you, Mitch. So the ITI has one instructional designer and several instructional technologists. The mission of the team is to collaborate with faculty and staff to implement innovative instructional technologies when they are effective. The early steps Mitch and Shabin put in place really were these curriculum change grants. That was incredibly important. But another piece of it that really helped was this faculty task force. So we had a number of faculty who were just interested in AI, and we pooled them together and we bounced ideas off of them in the early stages of this. What do we think might work? What might not work? That sort of thing. I want to go deeply on to policy. Now, I recognize that policy does not have a lot of sizzle, but it is the foundation that makes the whole thing work. And this is a big part of what happened in the early stages. So, the ITI helped to craft this, and it was crafted by many people in the organization, including people on this call. So we really tried to make it simple. The faculty, first of all, had to be in charge of choosing whether their course would allow generative AI to be used and how much of it could be used in their class. We also wanted to make it incredibly simple for them. So we created a really simple color coding system of red, yellow, green. So red, you can't use generative AI at all. Green, you can use it for anything unless the instructor says you can't. And then yellow, you can't use it unless it is a very specifically given permission from the faculty. And we applied that red, yellow, and green idea to three basic choices that the faculty had to make and articulate to the students. So the first was in coursework. So if the students are doing work outside of the lecture room, assignments, group presentations, those kinds of things. Is generative AI allowed for that? Red, yellow, green. The next is exams. So your exam policy might be different than their policy that you have on your coursework. And then the third, and this was incredibly important, was what citation does the faculty member want? So if generative AI is used, do we just want a link to the chat? Do we want a link plus a description of what the student did with it? Or do we want a deeper reflection as to how the student utilized generative AI and how they checked that it was right and what they learned from it? We also put into the policy, the generative AI is prone to bias, it's prone to hallucinating, and that the student is ultimately responsible for that. This policy went into the syllabus, it went into our learning management system, which is Blackboard, went into the student handbook, and a copy of that policy will be distributed to the attendees on this call today. The last thing I want to mention is that I want to emphasize the importance of workshops. So we did a lot of workshops. So the initial ones were to the faculty just to make sure we all understood what this emerging technology was and how it might be used, what's being done, what our policy is at the university. And then we went deeper and educated each of the students as they returned from summer break or they began their journey here. We also engaged with the staff because if you're in admissions or career placement or whatever, you might utilize generative AI to improve your job. And then the last piece was engaging with the alumni network to make sure that we were both listening to them and how they're using it out there, but also helping to educate them from a trusted source. So there was a lot that we did in these early stages. Mitch, did you have a summary you wanted to give in this section?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think the points you made, Dan, are really important. The ITI team sort of forming this foundation to support faculty, to help build that policy in. But this task force you referenced, the AI faculty task force that gave advice and was a sounding board as we move forward. And then the sharing process through workshops with faculty. Some of those were kind of directive, us educating. Others were sharing and sharing what people were doing. And that I think is a really critical piece that build on the grants and ultimately the kind of the leadership buy-in and incentives that were there. So this sort of gives the picture, Shivin, hopefully for that those early steps.
Yeah, there are not many instances when we actually kind of, as an institution, really embrace a new technology and really try to push it forward in multiple different ways, right? And in this scale, the vision was big, but the implementation was quite big as well. So it's definitely challenging, especially when we think about sort of faculty being, of course, in charge of their own content. But we talked about how we would integrate it. But there were some obstacles along the way. Not everything was smooth sailing as one does at this, this kind of a big initiative at an institutional level. So maybe you can talk a little bit, Mitch, about some of the obstacles we ran into and how we tried to resolve them so that maybe there's some lessons for our audience to take away from that as well.
Yeah, there were some big challenges. And of course, for a lot of the faculty, the thing they were most impacted by initially was academic integrity. They were worried about, wait a minute, I assign an essay and the student can have ChatGPT write it for them. And so, what does this mean? And, I mentioned that wasn't our focus at the beginning, but we had to address it still. And so that was a big piece of the challenge here. But I think faculty concerns were also related to, how do I develop expertise so that I'm ahead of students on this? So that, if I'm saying something in class, do you want me to put this into my class? Well, if I'm saying something, how do I know students aren't going to know more than me? And how do I maintain my sense of expertise? And of course, this puts demands on their time. And so those grants were a really important part of accelerating that time frame and getting faculty to recognize and recognize our commitment from the top about this. So I want to talk about the integrity piece because it really did create this big hole in the evaluation system. That just suddenly things could be coming through, and it's not even clear how to detect the use of this. I was really interested. I mean, detection is an important thing that I'll mention, but what we focused on was helping people shift the perspective on this. Not like, okay, let's just plug the hole, but rather, okay, how do you shift the way you're assessing? How do you change how you think about evaluation and what you need to evaluate in your course, given that generative AI is now part of what the toolkit that students have available to them. And a lot of it's free, and then they can pay for a little extra, and it's even better. And so we tried to get people to think about that in a broader sense. But really, this was an entryway for us to have a conversation with faculty about those broader changes to their classes and rethinking pieces. Faculty were very open to that conversation. We sort of said, look, you've got to make changes, because otherwise what you've been doing is probably just not going to work. But when you're making those changes, you might as well think bigger. And you're going to put the effort in anyway. So let's find ways to make it work even better. So we did come up with solutions related to proctoring, structuring assessments differently, things like handwritten exams. In some sense, parts of this are going backwards. Not that we were trying to suggest being Luddites, just the opposite. But there are pieces of examination where we need to assure that they're achieving expertise. And to do that, we have to cut off some of the possibility for superficial use of AI that students may confuse with their being expert enough. And so this is something I think that is just a really important theme. So, writing questions to make it difficult for AI to answer them, using time pressure and like images for online exams, proctoring online exams with, even though we give an exam that's online, using some proctoring support for that process. And changing shifting the weight of, kind of being more thoughtful about formative versus summative assessments. But we did not rely on AI recognition tools. And I think this is really important to the strategy that we took. We saw some early failures in this space and real problematic cases. When we did our quick examination of this, we found they were not up to par where we wanted them to be to rely on those as a tool. And that really felt like a crutch to us. And so we really, tried to convince faculty, don't go that direction. Instead, think about how do you do this in a way that's really more effective for the total goal of reaching your learning objectives and what you have to change for your learning objectives. The policy Dan talked about is important here too. Thinking about being really clear with students about that policy and helping students recognize what expertise they need. Many of our instructors decided, well, my final exam is not going to allow use of AI. So that means we need to communicate with students, help them understand they need to build that expertise so that they're ready for that final exam, and eventually have that perspective. So the rethinking assessments was really important. Building some use of generative AI right into some of the assignments and things so that it's part of the assessment. But then we also use tools like GradeScope and different kinds of testing frameworks that are fast, but also provide feedback that is harder for Gen AI to kind of break. But again, more broadly, we were thinking about changing the learning objectives, adjusting them to accommodate, and making sure that both the students got the expertise they needed and avoided the expertise concern for faculty. The workshops were a part of that, and getting faculty to invest their valuable time in doing this and building a learning community was really important. And I think so from a faculty perspective, Ravi would really be able to add to this part of the conversation. Ravi, do you want to say some things?
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Yes. Yeah, as Mitch said, once we got most of the faculty kind of beyond that thinking about academic concerns, integrity concerns in it, the first really big question that most of the faculty needed to answer was, how do I make time in my class for using AI? Because I suspect most business schools like we are on relatively short terms. We have a 7-week term where every class meets once or twice a week. It's very tight. There's very little slack for anything in that schedule. So therefore, trying to add extra work with AI into the class was a real challenge. The first instinct for me personally, and I suspect this was true for many of the faculty, was to think about this AI really more as instruction about AI as more of a supplement, as an add-on to something we were already doing in the class, instead of displacing something that already existed in the class. So I would personally do some demonstrations in class and then share a number of chats and prompts with the students so that they can spend time to going over them on their own time. But it turned out, not surprisingly, I guess in hindsight, it wasn't very effective to do things this way. Okay, so what it needed really in most cases was a fundamental rethink about the entire course in many ways. So you needed to go back to the learning objectives of the class and ask yourselves not just what is it that we are hoping students are going to learn from this class, but actually ask a more specific question, which is, what is it that we need students to learn in this class without the support of any kind of external resources, whether it's AI, the internet, or even a textbook? Okay, what is it that students should know factually and procedurally in terms of concepts purely by themselves, just cold? Okay, what is it that they need to know to be able to, maybe they can use AI to generate output, but what is it that they might be able to, they need to know to be able to critically think about the output that AI is producing? And of course, what is it that they should be able to do with AI? Because let's face it, a lot of the things going forward are going to involve the use of AI in the workplace. So that was an important piece of this too. And one of the things we found a very useful kind of framing device for this was to think in terms of students recruiting interviews and ask ourselves, suppose a student was facing an interview about things that are going to be in my course, what kind of questions would they need to be able to answer in that interview in a situation where they don't have access to AI or other kind of external resources? I think that helped provide us with a good perspective to understand what our students really need to know, but also that fed into what we wanted to assess the students about and the kind of assessments to choose to therefore align them with what we wanted students to learn. Okay. Now, as an instructor, a significant pedagogical concern from me, and this is true for other instructors as well, was the risk that AI would be used by students to engage in the course materials in a relatively shallow fashion. That AI would really substitute for student effort. And rather than deeply engaging with the course materials, they would take shortcuts with AI, right? So some of the students might default, for instance, of giving the assignment question or the problem to AI, getting a first draft out of it or an outline, and maybe refining it. And what this meant that students wouldn't necessarily get practice conceptualizing the problem, framing the problem, thinking about it unaided. And that means that all the usual productive failures that you have as a learner, when you're trying out things and not succeeding and learning from it, are really going away when people started to use it. So this was a real concern about the use of AI. Another challenge that I remember that some of the faculty faced, especially when they integrated very intensive and intentional use of AI in the homework assignments, is grading them. Because one of the things that AI did when students started using it in the homework assignments is that it really compressed the performance curve. The tails went away, especially the lower tail went away. And AI also tends to produce very verbose responses. So this created real challenge for grading. And in fact, the number of grading disputes and contentions like that actually started going up a little bit. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit is the challenge that's associated with the stochasticity of the output and the fact that this technology kept changing constantly. So if you're planning to do a live demonstration in class, it sometimes felt like a live wire act, right? You didn't know what you're going to get from the AI. You needed to quickly figure out what was going on and react to that. And not everybody was comfortable with trying to do this. I think some of this is not as important today because people have been using AI for about a little over a year now. Most people are quite familiar with it. And some of the wow factor associated with showing something that the AI is capable of, I think is a little bit gone away. So I think we can be a little bit more thoughtful about what kind of situations call for this kind of live wire act. Does it have real benefit in terms of engagement and learning? Otherwise, we can kind of maybe bring on things you've done in the before, some pre-created chats, and use that as a way to discuss and reflect on this. And I know, Mitch, that you kind of heard from a lot of faculty about this high wire back being something uncomfortable to them.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, one of the challenges here is related to what faculty are comfortable with and ready to engage in. And our grants worked really well to get people to accelerate their learning process and integrating these into their classes. But the live demonstration was one where I remember a faculty member saying, well, I wouldn't be comfortable with that. I'm not sure whether that would work for me. And so really meeting faculty where they are and figuring out how do you integrate it in a way that works for your course and your style. And, to what extent does this let you do things that you weren't able to do in the past versus you have to do this or, it's not going to work for your course. So we really try to be flexible. That was, in the policy, but and then sharing what we're doing so the faculty can see, and that really brought even more people on board. I think a broader set than the ones that were comfortable at the beginning. They see everybody else doing it, and oh, okay, yeah, I can see myself doing that.
That's true. We've had that really nice broad adoption at Simon, with really many of the faculty altering their courses, to a very different degrees, depending on what kind of content they taught and how comfortable they felt with the new technology. And we did invest a lot of time and effort into sharing those success cases and learning opportunities, because some of them, as we found out, were either not very useful uses of the technology, or doing it in class in real time was a high wire act that was sometimes backfired. So then I know that you led a lot of these workshops with faculty, and there were some really good use cases where really the technology of generative AI has impacted the teaching and learning environment and had broader implications than that one particular instructor and one particular class. Can you share a couple of these use cases that maybe give us a little bit more concrete examples of what Mitch and you and Ravi have been talking about?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shevin. So we get very good at teaching our courses and tweaking them on the margins. And, the university motto is Meliora, meaning ever better. So we're in a constant state of improvement. But generative AI, it required us to do much deeper rethinking of things. So the early use cases around this were it tended to be, right when students either started their journey at the business school or they were coming back from their summer breaks. And so the early ones tended to be around helping students learn to code better or to write code more efficiently in Python and that sort of thing. As we have progressed, we're hearing more use cases where the faculty is ensuring that the expertise of the course is really what drives the generative AI use. So I'll give you an example from one of my own classes that I just taught a couple weeks ago. And this is a marketing class on new product strategy. And in this class, the students are learning how to develop new products and using frameworks and do it in a systematic way. And they take on the role of being a new product manager for a variety of real world companies, Dyson, Bose, Lululemon, things like that. And so if you use generative AI, hey, generative AI, give me 10 good new products for Dyson to use. It will give you 10 good answers, but that's not a great exercise. A better exercise is to go through the work that they're doing in the course. So in the course, they are interviewing customers and they have data from those interviews. They turn those interviews into focus groups so that they can get qualitative data. And they can use that information. And then they're doing surveys and they have survey results. And if you feed that into generative AI and then ask it to consider all of those things when asking for new product ideas, you just get a much better response. So it goes back to what Ravi and Mitch and Shevin were all talking about, that you need this core level expertise in your subject matter in order to get the most out of the tool. And those are the use cases that we're seeing. I want to highlight a couple others really quickly. The instructional technology and innovation team, does these workshops occasionally. Just recently showed faculty how to use custom GPTs. That was an important one. We're also developing a new tool called the virtual TA. Now, we saw a demo of a tool that was developed at the Rotman School at the University of Toronto, and they put it up on GitHub, and it's open source. And this is more advanced usage. It requires coding. The other work was literally just prompts. So our IT team has taken that and built a tool around it that changes how we're going to teach and how students will learn. So what it can do is pull content from the Blackboard site, our learning management system, that the faculty allows to be a part of this virtual TA. So it might be lecture transcripts and decks that are created, or it might be non-copyrighted material, that kind of thing. And the students can then ask this virtual AI-driven TA questions about the material, give me practice problems, that sort of thing. And most importantly, the way this thing is coded is it stays within the bounds of what the faculty member gives it. It doesn't do broader searches on the internet. In other words, it sort of knows what it doesn't know and stays within those bounds. Coding the tool this way limits hallucination, and it allows the professor to control what's taught when. Ravi is going to use this in a course of his starting in mid to late March. As well, we've developed new courses. There's an AI in business course, which is about to start up, which teaches core skills and frameworks of how to get AI initiatives done in the workplace. But also, and I think this is incredibly important, the philosophy and ethics of how to stay on top of these rapid changes. We would not be responsible if we didn't spend a lot of time with the students trying to articulate what this all means and how it can be used responsibly. And ultimately, that'll make them more attractive candidates, better in the interview room, but most importantly, more engaging managers in the workplace. So I want to hand this off to Ravi as he runs the MBA program and is close to a broad range of use cases that are being used today.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, as Dan just described, I think there were a number of different use cases that we saw across a variety of different courses that supported and enhanced student learning. The way I think about this, I'd like to think about it in terms of three broad buckets of things that we ended up doing. The first set of things related to creating more effective pedagogical strategies and learning materials. So for instance, this took different forms in different classes, but some classes use this to create more examples for their students, or more practice problems and quizzes and things of that sort. Or actually just provided prompts to students who could use them to generate these by themselves when they needed it. I personally thought this kind of thing was particularly helpful when you could use the AI to help you develop some examples and materials that actually interleaved concepts from earlier in the course when you are kind of doing things later in the course. That not only provided opportunity for students for some repeated practice with things that they might have learned earlier, and in many cases actually forgotten because things are moving so fast, but also kind of, I thought, helped in fostering a kind of integrative thinking in the class and how different pieces are linked to one another. In some cases, I think the faculty used and took advantage of the fact that students had access to AI and they've been trained to how to use it to some extent to actually push deeper into analysis of things like cases, or asking them to consider case questions from multiple perspectives. This was something very hard to do in the past because that would have required a fair amount of time, and students have a limited amount of time. And when you ask them to do things that took a lot of time, it's not very easy to kind of ensure the students are actually compliant with that. So I think this was very helpful. I did that in my own class, where for instance, I do a case which is set in the 90s. And it's a little bit of a historical case. And very often when I ask students to think about the case and produce responses, they will very often use hindsight as a way to come up with it. I mean, they answer the questions as if they're thinking about it today, rather than a person was thinking about it 20 years ago or 30 years ago with the information that would have been available to them at that point. And there was ways of using prompts in a way you could get ChatGPT to help you reflect from the information that would have been available to somebody back in the 90s. So just examples of the kind of things you can probe using this kind of technology. And some of the instructors were using AI to be able to support like more flipped classroom style learning as well. Okay, that was one broad bucket. I would say the second broad bucket of use cases we were doing was to provide more scalable, personalized learning, as well as support active learning activities, which tend to be sometimes labor intensive. So these mostly consisted of things like providing prompts to the students to get personalized feedback on things like their communication courses or coding courses, or actually even in some cases, analytics courses. One of the instructors in the program she developed a custom GPT, which allowed her to support a learning activity she has in class around a simulation, where students have to go ask questions of a client for an analytics initiative they have, understand what the requirements of the analytics initiative are, and then actually design an analytic solution to that particular problem. In the past, what this required was a number of trained facilitators so that students could actually go ask questions to them. Now, I know the instructor Liza replaced this with a trained GPT where students could go online to the GPT, ask questions. And in many ways, actually, it worked a lot better than even the human facilitators because it took away a lot of the limitations people had in terms of how long they could spend actually asking questions and clarifying it. The third broad bucket, I would say, that we have use cases on, which is actually more recent, is really in terms of trying to provide very convenient real-time support to students in their learning, right? This is not just about improving the student learning, but actually making their learning time more productive. A lot of the students, at times the students are working late in the evening or into the night, and they're getting stuck or they're getting confused. They might get frustrated with the learning. And rather than wait until the next day or 2 days later for office hours, if they have something they can access, which can help them immediately get unstuck and avoid some of the confusion, that can be quite effective in their learning. Earlier on, this was mostly through kind of specific crafts that are prompts that were crafted for this purpose. But as Dan was alluding to a little bit earlier, we are experimenting with a virtual TA, which might actually help us quite a bit in the same fashion.
Yes, those are definitely great examples, that some of which I wish I had, back in my earlier days of teaching career. Certainly writing practice exams many times over were not the most fun activities you can do as an instructor, but this would have been a great tool. So quite a lot of activity going on at Simon with the grants, with faculty engaging, workshops, prompt engineering classes for all of our constituents, and rethinking. And actually, meanwhile, the entire technology is getting updated almost on a daily basis. How do we measure really what impact that we're having? How do we measure success of this particular initiative? I know we talked about this internally, of course, and not all of the metrics are quite there because it's still evolving and it's a relatively fast-moving space. So maybe, Mitch, you can give us just a couple of sentences about sort of how we're thinking about measuring the success of this initiative.
Yeah, I'd love to. So, I mean, there's a few different ways we're thinking about this. I mean, on the kind of input side, it's about faculty engagement. So, we had a lot of faculty engaged in integrating Gen AI into their courses. We had new courses being developed, and then the personalized instruction piece, all three elements of it. And so we saw around a third of the faculty receiving grants for this. And then, of course, the integration was actually well beyond that. And that was just through the fall and early spring. So, so there's lots of engagement, and then translating that into, thinking about, okay, how many people are attending the workshops and so forth. We get actually a large percentage of our faculty, enrolled in some way in this process of change. Well, the second piece is, well, what about the students? Are the students exposed to the tool? Are they engaged with learning about this? As Dan sort of elaborated on, that, we had these workshops that every student got exposed to. So every single student in every program had access to these prompt engineering workshops. And then on top of that, we had core AI material that were embedded again in every program. We built them in this first year. And so every student had some component of understanding about these. So we sort of designed in that piece of the metric. So then the next question, okay, does the exposure translate into outcomes for the students and the learning objectives being met? And there, so I can give you some examples. So the example Ravi was talking about for our analytic design and applications course, where students are interacting with this custom GPT. Well, actually, the students also developed a custom GPT as one of the project outcomes for the course. And so you can see directly that they're learning these things in this core AI course for that program, and then they're applying them by the end of that course to deliver a solution to, a challenging problem that the client presents. So we have those kind of like clear assessment processes that we are seeing the outcomes at that level. But there are pieces that we have, this is the first year and we haven't graduated as students yet. And so there are pieces like we plan to measure from their graduates, how they see this, what kind of jobs they're getting, talking to recruiting managers, surveying postgraduates, our internships for the MBAs, post-internship, how comfortable they were, how they felt like they were able to leverage this. These are all important measures that are indirect measures beyond the direct things that we're already seeing progress on.
Yes, definitely measuring some of the inputs and then figuring out really, what impact it has on our students' outcomes and how successfully they can use these tools in the areas that they go to as well. So that says something about not just about this current cohort of students who are experimenting with this technology with us and learning, we're all learning, together, but there needs to be a vision for the future as well. So Ravi, as the head of our MBA program, how do you envision the role of generative AI, evolving over the next 5 years? Let's say we solve some of these sort of immediate technical, or tactical problems, but then what's the next phase?
Yeah, Shivan, as you started in the beginning, I think we started with this big vision of what AI could do for us in terms of better pedagogy, more personalized training for students, better support, and so on. But also, I think we were careful to start with relatively small wins, small things we could do, and ensure quite broad support, as Mitch and Dan were talking about, in terms of faculty, and then to iterate. Right. So this is something we as faculty generally tend to be quite good at. We'll do something, learn from it. We'll try to improve it the next time around. And most of our quite understand that it takes 2 or 3 cycles to be able to do this well. But in some ways, AI reminds me of earlier technologies where we've had to do this. I'm not going to go quite as far back as the calculator in the 70s, but even just a couple of decades ago, if we went back when there was a deeper penetration of laptops for student use and the internet started becoming a bigger part of our lives. Some of the same kind of issues started coming up. This was a big transformation, and some of the initial concern was that this was going to cause big changes. And if you go back and think to the mid and late 90s, we had to think very carefully about what did the widespread penetration of the internet mean for business. What kind of possibilities did it open up for the business as well as for education, and how it transformed how people got things done. I think we have to do the same thing with AI as well. In fact, AI is going to be potentially even more transformative than that. So each of us as faculty have to think about how AI is going to impact work in our areas, and how we can incorporate that into our courses here. I think a great example of this is co-pilots, which we're beginning to see more and more. I think the initial emphasis when AI came out for the first several months was really about the chat interface and the conversational, way of working with AI. But as we move forward, I think a lot of the AI will get absorbed into the natural places where the work actually gets done, whether it is productivity software, whether it is analytical software, or everywhere else where basically get work get done. So this simply the technology itself will kind of partially disappear. We'll not think about it as so much as AI anymore. We just think about this as the normal ways of doing work. The software is going to be supporting us. The co-pilots are going to be supporting us. It's going to help us work more efficiently, produce better quality output. It's going to reduce the amount of time we need to write, to do research, to figure out things. And therefore, we need to build this kind of learning and how to use these tools into how we teach our students and how our students actually develop expertise. So this has to just become a natural part of the way they work. And for this to happen, it has to be curriculum-wide. This can't be done in 1 course or 2 courses. Every course in the curriculum needs to support this way of working. What is also going to happen, I guess, increasingly as we develop these tools, which are going to help support student learning, is that a lot of the learning will be kind of mediated by this technology and happen in an asynchronized fashion. So that means that's going to change the relationship between the instructor and the student. The nexus of learning might not be as much dependent on the interaction between professors and students. So we need to think about what that means for relationship between students and professors, and also how we calibrate whether students are actually able to learn well what it is that we are trying to teach them. And the last thing I want to briefly mention here is also thinking about teamwork. Because as business schools, teamwork has been something which has been extremely important always, and rightly so. But we also need to think about how AI is going to affect that. Because I think one of the motivations, at least historically, for teamwork was for students to be able to learn from each other, to support each other in their learning. And if they are actually using AI for some of that, then the motivation for some of the teamwork goes away. So we need to think carefully about that. And I actually think there's ways of actually using AI to actually support and empower teamwork, but that's going to require some careful thought and design.
Okay, well, thank you. Lots for us to and for all of us in business education to think about. So as we turn on to the last question before we open it up to certainly the Q&A session, we're still continuing in our innovation journey at Simon. We've certainly gained a lot of valuable insights over the last year, and Dan and Ravi, you're at the forefront with students and faculty, and you've certainly encountered a lot of noteworthy experiences. For maybe some of our audience members who are either earlier phases of their adoption of this technology and are thinking about applying it to other parts of their institution. So let's share some advice. How can they help seamlessly integrate the generative AI into both curricular and co-curricular activities that hopefully we can save other folks a little bit of time and energy and resources as well, learning from our experience.
Thank you, Shabin. So I'll go first. I'll give a few bullets. So the first is that this isn't a choice. You have to think more about how to do it rather than whether to do it. We are well conditioned in academia to wait, to look at the data, to study. This is different. It's here, it's good, it works. We have to move quickly and thoughtfully, of course. When using it, it has to include human expertise to guide it, to get the most out of it. You really do have to coax good work out of it, not just ask for an answer. At a program level, it has to be a comprehensive program for the entire school. Executive buy-in right from the beginning, that was essential to making this work at all. At a broad level, engaging faculty, students, staff, alums across the whole spectrum of the school, really important. That those unglamorous tactical things, policies got to be right. The incentives have to be right. That reinforcement learning through people sharing successes and what worked and what didn't and what they're thinking of doing, incredibly important. Calling on the alums, listening to how they're using it in their workplace and what kinds of people they need to help them execute their vision. That's really important. And the last thing, I really do want to underline that we have to teach this ethically. We have to use it ethically. And that's a tough thing. We're taking analytical students and asking them philosophical, moral, and ethical questions. And that's a lot of fun to teach. So Ravi, do you have anything you want to add to the list there?
Yeah, no, I just want to add a couple of things very quickly so that we leave some time for the questions in the end. Mostly from a faculty perspective, and I want to start with the big elephant in the room that Mitch started with, right? I think as faculty, we have to be really, really careful not to get caught up in trying to catch the cheaters. Not putting a lot of, thinking about AI integrity as being the big piece of it. And in my own personal experience, actually, what I found is that we tend to overestimate to some extent the impact of the student's ability to cheat or to use AI to rely on that. So I want to make sure that we don't focus exclusively on that and miss the big point. And I think one of the ways of reducing that focus on academic integrity is really try to focus more on the process in the course and the assignment rather than the outcome or the deliverable for the students. Going back to some of the things that Dan and Mitch were talking about, really emphasize to the students that students should really be thinking about this as a thinking companion, something as a sounding board to interrogate, to reflect with. And the last thing I'm going to say is that it is important that we carefully set the expectations to the students in terms of what and how we want them to be using AI. Because I'd alluded to this kind of concern that we have about that students might use this as a substitute for effort and therefore not learn some of the things that we want them to learn. So therefore, I think it is very important to communicate to students the learning outcomes, the reason why we have a certain set of activities or assignments in the class. What is it that we are hoping they will learn, and why it's important to learn that, and how using AI or not using AI contributes to that, so that they, as adult learners, can make informed choices about how they can use AI to empower themselves, rather than simply use it as a substitute for their own efforts. So I want to leave it at that, and so that we have some time for questions.
Great, thank you. And again, if you have any questions, please do type it into the Q&A prompt over there on your Zoom, and we're happy to take those. Any of us are happy to take those questions, and you can ask about specific examples or anything else that you have in mind. While we wait for some of those extra questions to come through, let's talk about another elephant in the room, perhaps, that pops up in a variety of settings, and it's and education and higher education institutions are not necessarily immune from it, which is a different kind of substitution. We talked about the substitution of effort for students. We're talking about now, AI-powered, teaching assistants. We're talking about, making things more asynchronous, and a lot of the learning happening outside of the classroom. We've had, actor guild, Hollywood actors and writers going on strike. We have people worrying really very much about their jobs going away or being altered significantly by the proliferation of AI. What does it mean for business school instructors and professors? What are some of the discussions around there? Mitch, I see you gearing up to answer, so go ahead.
That's a great question. I mean, I can see a possibility in the future where these avatar, you can already create an avatar likeness of yourself that looks like you, not that some, cartoon looking thing, but looks like you, sounds like you. And with the virtual TA, you can imagine it being able to have conversations with people, asynchronously, that are like you. This is a dramatic extension of the potential educational influence that an instructor can have. But it also, who owns that, and how does that work for intellectual property? The same kinds of conversations that I think were happening in Hollywood, and I think are eventually going to be relevant very much for education of, how do we manage this? What is the intellectual property rights? How should we work this together as an academic institution? Yeah, those are big questions.
Yeah. Definitely questions that we will continue to address. So here's a question coming in through the chat. It's asking about the engagement of the stakeholders across the spectrum, how you will or already have engaged, how we have already engaged with employers outside of the alumni. And before maybe we answer that, we can talk a little bit about first how we engage with our alumni, and then those business and industry partners who are not necessarily alumni. I don't know.
Yeah, I maybe I can kick this off and others can jump in. So from the beginning, we planned out a series of alumni focus groups that were intended to inform. We also ran an alumni survey early in the process, trying to gather both an understanding of kind of how they're thinking about AI, what they're doing to implement AI, what kind of skills they're looking for from students. And then in those focus groups, really diving deeper to understand the applications, the way that they're leveraging AI versus human, the role of human in the loop. Some key themes coming out of that were things like, well, we expect human to be in a loop for the near future, and especially this is true in more regulated areas, but even in areas that aren't regulated, that's kind of only where we already had used other tools to take humans out of the loop are we using AI for that. But there are incredible applications they're doing. the one key thing that we heard is familiarity with the tools, the ability to be flexible and adaptable. So some training, but really it's an education, not just sort of tool level training that they're looking for. And that's kind of the bread and butter. We were very happy to hear some of those kinds of themes, because that's the bread and butter what Simon has been doing. One point I want to say, they were also very excited about a program we launched. We're doing right now, our online MSBA. We've added applied AI to that program. And that program is really embedded AI through the whole program, so that students from the beginning to the end are leveraging that tool. That's the kind of thing that familiarity, understanding how to use it, how to embed it into the way they think about business and creating value.
Yeah, I would like to also add that we have a corporate engagement office at Simon, who engages with, corporations and industry partners broadly. They don't need to be alumni, of course, and they're both regional in our community and national and global. And we have it at every approach. We do ask them about their use of AI. We do ask them about what they expect, kind of the kinds of tools from the workforce that will be coming, into the marketplace. And we try to gather as much information to supplement the more direct ways that we engage with also our alumni as well. And we want to kind of have Simon and other business schools to be areas where this sort of industry and higher education partnership of learning the best use, the expertise and everything else, including the responsible use and the ethical use of these technologies, is where I think this is where that kind of partnership can be very, very important. But we integrate it into every conversation, as we do with, into all of our curricular pieces as well. So one of the other questions coming up is that, are there any good resources out there to help us learn and get ideas, e.g. AI for dummies? So if there are any, resources that we can point some of our maybe new to this domain. Dan, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I can take that really quickly. So there's so much information out there. I think we all know that. Every time you look on LinkedIn, in the business press, anything, there are questions, there are articles, there are courses. I took a Coursera course right when this thing came out, and just to understand the basics of it, and it's already outdated and that kind of thing. One of the things that we do is in some of these AI courses is make students kind of keep their ear to the ground as to what's going on out there, so that you can learn quickly, because it's all happening so quickly. So it's any number. I can't recommend one AI for dummies source. There's just a lot of it out there, and it should be pretty easy to find.
Okay.
And the other thing I want to just say about that is, part of the thing that Gen AI does is make it so not everybody has to be a coder to leverage many of these tools. And so I would warn against trying to get faculty having to have that level of understanding. Instead, thinking about it as higher level, not deep, know all the frameworks of how these are structured, but what can you do with it? More application focus.
And actually, that was one of the approaches that we took in our workshops, especially when we were workshopping with our staff and when we were workshopping with some of our alumni who came with a variety of degrees of usage and familiarity. Is that, this is, it's let's open up our computers and let's actually use the tool, in real time, so that you get familiar. And you see that the interface, or at least the chat GPT interface, because it's a natural language processing, it's actually very easy to interact with, and you don't have to know. But there's some important elements, that it's probabilistic, that it's going to spit out something different, that it does hallucinate. So there are just some key factors that we try to make sure that everybody who's coming to it, for a first pass, understand and what kind of information it conditions on as well.
Shavin, just coming at that question from a slightly different perspective, I guess. I think a useful way of thinking about it is going back to what we know about student learning and what facilitates student learning and what kind of things support that. And then thinking about how AI can be used as a way to make it more effective. And I think in that perspective, I think there's it definitely, as Dan alluded to, a number of articles that people have written, some pretty good articles that are available online. And I think some books are just beginning to come in, which are talking really about, putting this back in the framework of the literature on learning that we already have and using AI to support that. I think those might be good resources to get started.
That's very, very true. And we're at time right now. And I would also encourage all of our business school faculty and administrators to engage with different departments across your university as well. For example, we are fortunate enough to have a education school that is very much interested in learning technologies and has been at the forefront of that. Computer science department, data science department, including our digital health and medical school as well. So there's a lot of learning to be gained from talking to even just folks outside of our own kind of units as well. Well, I just want to thank all of you, Dan, Mitch, and Ravi, for participating in this conversation together. And a big thank you to our audience for engaging with us during this hour. So thank you very much, and best of luck to all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you.